All right, guys. Welcome back to another lesson. We're going to talk about distance and midpoint today. Quite a bit to get through, so I want to just kind of speed along here. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is how do you find distance between 2 points? And that's the important part of this. And how do we come up with an equation for it? So I have these 2 points, and I just made them anonymous. x1, y sub 1 is this coordinate. X sub 2, y sub 2 is that guy's coordinate. And I want to find how far I traveled from here to here. Okay, that's the goal. So notice something. I can get there if I travel horizontally until I'm right underneath that point. And then I can travel vertically until I'm right at my destination. Now this horizontal and vertical line gives me a 90-degree angle. So that's pretty useful. And if you look back, if you think back to some previous geometry stuff that you learned, and kind of choppy throughout your years before you took high school geometry, the Pythagorean theorem should come to mind. I'm going to abbreviate that. Okay, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, why do I bring that up? 2 reasons. One, I have a right triangle, which this guy I'm allowed to use. The second thing is, if I find the hypotenuse length, which is what this is, then I found the total distance between those 2 points. And that's what's important here. The only thing I need is what? Well, this is C, this is A, this is B, just your legs, it doesn't matter which one. So how far did I travel in that direction where A is? I need to know that measurement. Well, it's actually subtracting the x's, right? If I subtract the x's here, I know how far I traveled. So this is going to be x2 minus x1. I'm going to subtract the x coordinates. Up here, how high or how far did I travel vertically? Well, I'll subtract the y coordinates, and that'll tell me how far I traveled. C, that's what I want, right? From A to B, or from this point to this point, I should say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute these guys into here. So c squared stays the same. And actually, I apologize. Let me bring it down here. Okay, so c squared doesn't change. A is going to be x2 minus x1 squared. And b is y2 minus y1 squared. Now, the 2's and 1's, they don't do anything to the calculation. The only thing they're there for is to tell you, hey, this is point 1, this is point 2. All right? Now, if I want to solve for c, I got to square root both sides. Right? They cancel. So the square root of subtracting your x values and squaring them, subtracting your y values and squaring them, will give you your hypotenuse. That's my distance. Sorry if you can hear that. My garage door is not soundproof here. So looking at this, I could change C to D to represent distance. This guy is the distance formula. Okay? We're going to use this formula to calculate distances between the 2 points. So this is just a quick way of showing you where this formula comes from. So before I even talk about it or show you it, okay? Now, could you use Pythagorean theorem every single time to find your distance? Yeah, you're essentially doing this, okay? So let's go ahead and jump into the lesson. Okay, so there's the formula. So once again, the subscripts are just telling you what point you're looking at, okay? So we're going to do 2 problems. First one, example 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the formula right here. I will always give you this formula, so you don't have to memorize it. But I will say, you're going to use this a lot the next couple of days, so it's going to probably be like engraved in your memory here. So we want to find the distance between these 2 points. So 4, 9, and this guy's 2, -3. Okay? My first step would be to label. If you're new to this concept, label things. I'm going to make this my first point. No reason why. So this is the first x coordinate, the first y coordinate. By default, these must be my second. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these points into here. I'm going to substitute, okay? So here we go. So I'm going to have 2 minus 4 squared, negative 3 minus 9 squared. Now I'm going to simplify. 2 minus 4, that's negative 2 squared. Negative 3 minus 9 is negative 12 squared. We'll continue. Negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 12 squared is 144. Add those up. We get the distance between those 2 points. It's the square root of 148. Which, oh no. Be right back. I was going to grab a calculator. Let's see. Square root 148. There we go. So roughly 12.2 if I round. 12.2 inches, feet, however far you travel. Okay? So there's my first problem. I know I kind of went through the simplifying part a little bit quickly. I want to try and make the video small, so that way you can get the full thing. Okay? And that's it. Now, here's how you know you did something wrong. It's always important to know that. This number that's underneath will never be negative. One thing I want you to remember, square root is always associated with some sort of distance that you're talking about. And you can't have negative distance. So if you get a negative number underneath here, and you're not catching that, and you blindly put in your calculator, it's going to come up as an error. So when you're squaring these numbers right here, okay, that's taking care of the negative. So when you simplify, you're never going to be adding a negative underneath the square root. That's very important to remember. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this. And we're going to do the second problem. So this time, A is going to be at negative 3, 4. B is at 2, negative 4. Okay? And I want to find the distance between those 2 points. So I'm going to label. There's my first. There's my second point. Doesn't matter which is your first or second. Your work will look a little different than someone else who labeled it differently. But you're going to get the same answer. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and substitute. So I'm going to subtract the x's. So 2 minus a negative 3. And a negative 4 minus 4. Didn't have enough space there. Okay. 2 minus a negative 3 means we're adding them. So that's going to be 5 squared. Negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8. All right. Probably the most common error in these problems is negatives. Okay. People don't do well with them. So you got to look, when you're done with your answer, go back through it and make sure you do the negatives right. 5 squared is 25. Negative 8 squared is 64. So let's see, the distance, 20 and 60 is 89. Okay? So, square root of 89 is going to be roughly 9.4 if I round to the tens place. Okay? And that's it. So label your points, plug it in, simplify each step of the way, and get your final result. Now, can you skip some steps, like from here to here? Could you do that? Do you have to show each part? Technically not. Word of caution, though. If I made an error, what's easier to figure it out? if I showed every step or if I showed only one step. It's going to be hard to know what you did wrong. And it's going to be hard for the teacher, okay, to help you with that. So yeah, it's a little tedious to write every step, but in the long run, it's making sure you're cautious and careful, especially when it comes to negative numbers. Okay? So now there is another problem, but I think 2 is good enough. I think you can kind of get the gist of it just from looking at that. Okay? Midpoint formula, sometimes known as the average formula. When you take the average of 2 numbers, you divide by 2, right? So if I want to find the middle of a line, so here's my line segment, let's say, and I want to find right here the midpoint, right there in the middle. Well, isn't that, if I were to connect, like I did last time, isn't this guy halfway between your x's? This one's halfway between your y values. So since it's halfway, take each coordinate, add them up, divide by 2. So there's my next formula. And no, you don't have to memorize, but I think the more you use it, the more it's going to become easy to remember that. Okay? So midpoint, we're talking about the middle. Okay? So let's do a couple problems like this. So first one, example 3, find the midpoint, and here are the points we're going to use. Okay? And you could graph this. You definitely could. Okay? You can graph it, and you can figure out where the middle is. Sometimes it can be tough, though. If my midpoint is not a whole number, if it's a fraction of a whole number, then it's going to be hard to decipher exactly what it is. So as much as I like the visual approach to it, it's a little bit better just to use the formula. So I'm going to go ahead and label my points. First, second point. Now, notice something. My formula, and I'm going to go back to this. My formula is written as an ordered pair, right? There's a reason for that. It's a midpoint. The title of it, it's a point, okay? So our answer is not going to be a distance. It's not going to be a number. Okay, it's going to be an ordered pair. So keep that in mind. So if you look at the formula, like, wait a minute, that looks odd. Well, it should be because it's actually an ordered pair. So I'm going to go ahead and add my x values. Doesn't matter the order, right? Addition's commutative. So 5 plus 3 divided by 2. I'm going to go the same direction. Negative 3 plus negative 8 divided by 2. So 5 plus 2 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Negative 8 plus 3, negative 3 is negative 11. Divided by 2 is negative 5.5. So there's my midpoint. Okay. And you could confirm, you can graph this and see if it truly does resonate in the middle of that line segment, okay? Or if it's in the middle distance-wise for both of them. Okay? All right, let's do another one. This time, the points are 7, 1, 4, negative 1. Find the midpoint. So I'm going to label, and you know what? I'm going to show you. It doesn't matter. So I switched it on you. Here's my first point, there's my second. Like I said, you're going to get the same answer. So here we go. I'm going to add the x's together. I'm going to add the y's together. Okay. Making sure you're keeping it as an ordered pair as you're going through it. 7 plus 4 is 11. Divided by 2 is 5.5. 1 plus negative 1, that's 0. And if I divide that by 2, it's still going to be 0. So there's the midpoint for this guy. Okay. Once again, not a bad calculation. You just have to know how to get to it. So, like I said, this is like the average formula. Like you're taking the average of the x values, average of the y values. Okay. All right, so we're going to jump into these last two examples. Find the coordinates of a missing endpoint if B is the midpoint of AC. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So visually, what's that look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. So here's where I start. Here's the middle. I don't know where it ends. The end's a mystery to me, and I got to figure that part out. Okay? So when trying to figure this out, a lot of people go right to the distance formula. Like, well, can't I find the distance from here to here and mimic it up there? Okay, you could, but there's a problem with that. Think of it this way. How do I add a distance to a point, to an ordered pair, an xy point? You really can't. So the distance formula is not the one I want to use for this. I want to use midpoint. And in fact, what I'm going to do to figure this out is I'm going to break it apart. I'm going to look at the x's and the y's separately. So here's my points. So here's this. Here's B. Okay. Now, B is the midpoint. So I'm going to make this mx, my. Midpoint x coordinate, midpoint y coordinate. And then this would just be, I don't know, x1, y1. My first point, I'm trying to find the missing second point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug these numbers into here. So it's two separate formulas. And I'm going to write it out like this. Midpoint of the x's, see how I just kind of took the formula apart? Midpoint of the y's, I took the formula apart, there we go. All right. Now I'm going to substitute. So -2 is equal to -5 plus the missing x coordinate divided by 2. Now, here's what I would recommend. You see that sub 2 or sub 1, whichever you use, I would get rid of it and just leave it as an x. Because I've seen people in the past where that subscript they were using as a calculation. And I can see why. To solve this, I want to get rid of the 2, bring it over here. If I'm dividing by it, we're going to multiply to cancel things out. Okay? I get -4 equals -5 plus x. Add 5 to the other side to get x by itself. So I get the x coordinate to be 1. So this guy's a 1, the x coordinate. This is just a general graph. Okay, this isn't what goes with this. Over here, my y coordinate average is 5. So I'm going to see what this guy's going to give me. So 4 comes down here. Now, you see how I solved the x's? I'm going to solve the y's identically. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2, so those cancel. I get 2 times 5 is 10, equals 4 plus y. And then I'll subtract 4 from both sides. So what is my missing endpoint? Where is this guy ending at? It's going to end at 1, 6. That guy's going to be my answer. Okay? Now, this is usually where people have difficulty because you're using the midpoint in a strange way. I'm breaking it apart to figure this guy out. All right, so it's going to take a little bit of practice. Don't be discouraged. It's okay. Got me to help. All right, I'll be glad to walk you through different problems. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to leave this. So if you want to, like in your notes, if you want to say find a missing endpoint, these are the formulas you want, you can do that. So my new points would be 1, 7, and then B is -3, 1. Once again, B is my midpoint. It tells me that in the problem. So these are my midpoint x and y coordinates, and then here's my first point's coordinates. And I want to find this guy. I want to find where's my destination ending at. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and substitute these values in. So I'll look at the x's. The midpoint of the x is -3, and then we get 1 plus x divided by 2. Once again, I'm not going to include the subscript. I know that's the second point. I don't want to be confused with the calculation. Pardon me. Swallowed my spit wrong. It's all right. Okay, I think I'm good. No, I'm not. Too much talking. Okay, so we're going to multiply both sides by 2. So this guy gets -6 equals 1 plus x. Remember, these 2's cancel. And last step, subtract 1. So my x-coordinate is going to be -7. Now, looking at the y's, I'm going to do the same thing. The midpoint of the y-coordinate is 1. This guy's a 7. I don't know y sub 2 yet. I'm trying to figure it out. But I'm not going to include the subscript because, once again, I don't want to confuse the calculation part. To get rid of the 2 here, if you're dividing, you want to multiply. Those guys are gone, so we get 2 equals 7 plus y. Subtract 7. -5 equals y. That's my missing y-coordinate. So then we get -7, -5 as my final answer. Okay? Oh, drop the marker. And that's it. Okay? That's how to find the missing endpoint, using the midpoint formula in a different way. I will give you these formulas. You don't have to memorize them. Okay? We're going to do some practice with this on the next couple days. Could you use Pythagorean theorem to find distance? Absolutely, and I won't discourage you with that. But I want to make sure you understand this formula and how to use it. So for the next couple days, try and get used to it. Okay? Label your points, substitute, show as many steps as possible. Okay? So that way, if you do make a mistake, we can always go back to check to see, oh, did you do the negatives correctly? Did you square each number correctly? Because there is quite a bit of steps to make sure you get the distance. All right? That's it. So I try to make this as short as possible. If you have any questions, just let me know. Watch the video as many times as you'd like, okay? Until you understand it. Until then, I will see you all in the next lesson. Have a good day, guys.